Hey folks, welcome back to KEI Fabrication. Alright folks, this is all part of my insanity. This is my transmission cooling line for my Ford 4500 backhoe. It's a 1972. What ended up happening is, over time, obviously, the hydraulic hose failed and it was pumping hydraulic fluid, transmission fluid all over the ground. These things are probably available, but if you buy one used, it's going to have this already, and they're not available new. So, you have to come up with an alternative, right? Well, here's what I'm up to. If it works, maybe it'll help some of you folks out. This is a -10 fitting by 1/2 inch ID. This is a 5/8 OD tube. The plan is to cut 1/2 of this double male fitting off, drill 5/8 in for a shoulder, and then slip it onto the tube and weld it up. I'm going to do that in 2 locations. The reason why I have to go with such a long piece of hose is this, the only place that I had available was going to make hydraulic hose. This is much more rigid than this. This is way overkill. It's good for several thousand PSI. This only is 300 PSI working pressure, so I'm overkill, but you got to do with what's available. So this is going to go here, and being long enough, it's going to end up having the flexibility to get over the loader frame. I'll show you what it looks like when it's installed, and I'm going to make the second interruption and weld on another fitting here, and this goes back to the input on the transmission where the pump inside the transmission connects. So the plan is modify these fittings, cut the hose, the broken part of the hose off the tube, clean it up, slip this on, weld it on in 2 locations, then go install it on the tractor. If this works, we're talking about a $40 fix. Take you about an hour or so to do it. If it doesn't work, well, we all learn from my mistakes, right? Alright, couple of things here, folks. The reason why I did not drill all the way through with the 5/8 drill bit is I would have taken off too much of the tapered seat that's going to provide the sealing mechanism for this hydraulic hose. So I drilled in enough to provide a shoulder, so the tubing slips inside and it kind of gives me a hands-free situation. So when it's in the vise and I'm ready to weld, it'll be a hands-free situation. Now the other thing that I need to do is the tubing is super thin. So the fact that I have this flange here will allow me to focus the heat of my weld onto the vertical wall of the flange and then wash it down onto the tube very carefully to not blow through the diameter of that thin wall tubing. So if it goes according to plan, it should work. If not, I'm going to be blowing holes in my tube and I'll have to go in and pulse weld to fill those holes. I hope that's not the case. This is a galvanized coated fitting. The fact that I turned the face down got rid of all the galvanizing on the hex head flange. So let's go ahead and see how I make out trying to weld this tube in place. Oh yeah, and by the way, as with anything like brake lines or anything, make sure your ends are on and where they belong before you weld it up. So some of you might be wondering why I was pulse welding or stitch welding, whatever you want to call it. That's one way to keep the heat increased, and I've got a thicker metal versus a thinner, so if I'm concentrating the first part of the puddle onto the thick part, I can wash it up to the second part. By pulsing it, you're allowing a little bit of that heat to escape, and then it's still glowing orange when you put the next puddle in, so you do get penetration. But what it does is it prevents the thin part of your weld to get overheated, turn molten, and then just blow out. So whenever you pulse weld like that, if you're watching closely, you'll see a little pinhole in the center of the weld. If you're doing something that you need to have the capability of holding hydraulic pressure, you want to make sure that your puddle washes over that. So that's why my stacked dimes here are pretty close together, because I'm allowing the puddle to go further over the halfway point, maybe covering it up all the way to 1/4 of the diameter of the bubble. And then what that does is that makes sure if that little sinkhole that is the pinhole is completely covered up, and you've got new material going in and filling that void. So, and then when you finish up the weld, you want to make sure that you overlap at least the full bead. It doesn't look pretty, but that covers up that initial cold portion of the weld at the end. So I'm talking like I was successful here, but we really won't know until we put pressure on it. So let's put this thing back together and see what it looks like. Alright, before I put this with any other part of the equipment, I'm going to thoroughly wash and blow out all of these to make sure that any of those metal shavings from the bandsaw and the belt sander and all those things, or any debris as associated with the weld penetration, will be completely washed out of the tube. So we're going to do that now, and then we're going to go put it on the tractor. Alright, I just pre-assembled the radiator side of the transmission cooler to the hose because it's pretty tight down inside there, and I pre-assembled the back half of the tube on the transmission fitting. So now we just gotta connect the rest of it up. Alright, so we got just a little dilemma that I have to overcome because the original metal line was somewhat smaller in diameter. It kind of pointed that hose that used to go here. It used to go underneath this, and that's actually why it failed, is the kink in the hose was actually pretty tight down below. So really all I have to do is open that bend up right there where I welded the fitting on and point it further to the outside. The only real dilemma I have right now is that it is going to rub on the generator belt. So we're gonna take the fitting back off from the radiator, open that up just a touch, and hopefully provide some clearance to point this out this way so it's closer to this hydraulic return and be plenty of distance away from the generator belt. So let me give that a shot and I'll let you know how I make out. Other than that, we're getting close, right? Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Just a tiny bit of adjustment in that hard line, and we're right smack dab in the middle between the hydraulic return and the generator belt. So that can flop around a little bit, as diesels do, and not rub. So we're going to do a final tightening of the lines, and we'll start it up and check for leaks. We're back here at the connection. We got a nice lazy loop. I'm going to incorporate the factory strain relief bracket on the transmission to the line, and we should be good to go. Alright folks, we're going to call that a success. I just tested it in forward and reverse. No leaks. Transmission's good and crisp. Well, there you have it folks. Ford 4500 transmission line, 4662.